Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. This week we were blessed with the opportunity to have a conversation with the beautiful and lovely Savanna Riker. What a very chill individual, somebody who has moved through immense, incredible experiences, and you and her have a very unique story of how you met.
We shared our stories. You'll have to listen to the podcast, but I want to also tell you about Savanna. Savanna Riker is a speaker, a teacher, and spiritual counselor. She's an ordained minister with her master's degree in consciousness studies, and she's been a guest speaker all around the country, including actually nationally and internationally, London, Vancouver, and Cairo. And she is one of the leaders, young leaders of the New Thought movement. So enjoy our conversation with the beautiful Savanna. Hi, Savanna. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey, guys. So good to be here.
Oh, my goodness. This is such a treat to have you on, and we're going to get into how you and I met years ago. But we'll dive in with the first question that we always have, which is, many seekers can recall that point in time when they started to question their, reality that they were taught as children. So do you remember when you became a seeker?
I remember I kind of just fell into it. There are so many stories that people have about how, I found this book and it was so cool when I found this book. I had this awakening, or I was on a mountaintop somewhere in Cambodia and something magical happened. But I don't have one of those stories. It was one of those things where I followed the bouncing ball of my life, and I started to pay attention. I started to pay attention to the signs. It was like, I think I'm being led over here. Okay, I'm going to go here. I think I'm now being led over here, so I'm going to go here. So I think there wasn't any actual point. It was just a bunch of points, I guess you could say, a bunch of moments that helped to guide me from one place to the next.
Well, I think many people do have, I love the bouncing ball. That's just like the best image ever. Beautiful. And I was wondering what this was going to be, because when we met, you were 16 years old, and we'll tell more about it later. But maybe when was, because we met when you were in the New Thought Church in Colorado. You were part of a youth group there. And so was your mom or dad or parents into that? So you were already into that way of thinking, or at least introduced to it as a teenager. So
how did that happen? Yeah. So I moved in the middle of my sophomore year of high school from West Texas. So I grew up in a tiny town in West Texas. And out of what was an unfortunate situation with my father, I ended up just launching my life into Colorado. It was one of those decisions that was really hard because, you care so much about what people think at that age. And it was all I'd ever known. And through a really unfortunate abusive dynamic between my father and I had to make the decision. Do I stay or do I move to Colorado where my mother was? And so I just moved. And I walked into a center for spiritual living called Mile High Church in Lakewood, Colorado. And I walked in and was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. What is this? And yet something kept calling me back to it. And so the way that I kind of got into the whole spiritual path thing, if there was an entry point, was a talent show that they were putting on. And I love to sing. And so I was like, I'll just sign up for the talent show. So they got me kind of hooked in through that. And then I just kept questioning. I was like, what is this? This is so different than the God of my childhood. This is so different than anything I ever learned growing up. And then I got to the point where it was like, well, all of the stuff that I learned growing up was like a lie. like all of the beliefs as a child that I was told were just so disempowering. And I had walked into this space now, and that's probably the reason why I kept going back. Even though I didn't really get it, and I thought this is the weirdest thing ever, there was something that was soulfully resonant within me that was like, you need to keep coming back. That's why I say it was like the bouncing ball, because there wasn't a defining moment. It was just like, go to this next thing, right? So that's kind of how it started. And my mother was actually very active because she walked in and she's like, oh my God, this is home. I've been looking for this place my whole life. And you hear a lot of spiritual seekers say that when they walk into like a spiritual center that, you know, it's resonant. It's this place of I'm home. Where was this whole time, you know? So yeah.
Okay, so I think now this is like a nice gateway to talk about, because I want to tell my side of the story now. So, because I do remember now you saying something to me in our interaction that was so powerful about you moving to Colorado because of this. It was a very difficult time in your life. And when you reached back out to me 10 years later, you said that it was a connection you remembered. So here's my side of the story, and then I want to hear yours, because we have not talked about this. We've not connected face to face in 20 years, and since you were 16. And so I was hired. I went to Colorado. I was hired by the Mile High Church to sing at a retreat up in the mountains at an all women's retreat. And after it, they said, "Oh, we're doing this youth retreat too," and they wanted my singing partner and I to come and do the youth retreat also after this women's retreat. So we were just gonna, I didn't really know much about it. I just knew it was a youth group. And we were going to sing. And then all of a sudden they knocked on our door and said, all the youth are getting together in this room. We want you to sing a couple songs. They're going to do a ritual. Bring something that means something to you that you're willing to give away. I wasn't clear, I wasn't filled in about what it was really. And so I didn't get the memo until I got into the room. And so all I had was, so my friend is like, you have to have something. And I'm like, I don't have anything. And so then all of a sudden I looked at my finger, which, usually there is a gold ring on this finger that was on my finger for probably, it's 20 years ago, 57, 47, 37. It was on my ring for at least 15 years at that point. And my friends, I sang on Star Search. When I was, 23 years old with Ed McMahon. And my friends who used to follow me around at all the pubs I used to sing at in Canada had given me this gold pinky ring. And I had not taken it off in, 15 years or so. And so I was trying to take it off. I was going to put it in the center. And the ritual was that we would be chanting and everybody would put something that meant something to them in the center of the circle. And then at the end of it, people would go sort of one at a time as they felt so you'd give away something and get something. And then you were allowed to go pick out something that wasn't yours to take it with you to mean something. And maybe you can fill in a little more, Savanna, because that's like my memory of it. And so then, so I'm trying to take off my ring and my friend is looking at me with her eyes wide open. She's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't like to be attached to anything. Maybe this will mean something to somebody else. And I just felt I was ready to let it go. And I put it in the center and I wasn't hurt about it. I was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing. So then I remember, and I want to hear your side of the story. Then after the whole ritual, I see this, beautiful young girl, go up and she gets the ring. So she comes up to me after the ceremony and she says, oh my gosh, I saw you put the ring in the center and I knew that I wanted this ring. I just love your singing and I'm a singer too. And I'm going through a hard time and this just means so much to me, she says. So that was it. That's all I remember. And 10 years later, she finds me on Facebook or sends me an email, I think, through my website and says, she wrote me a long email. This is Savanna. Not sure if you remember me. Of course I remember her. The ring meant so much to me and this is what I'm doing in my life. And then we connected on Facebook and Instagram and we've been connected in the ethers, but we have not connected until now. So and I love to see what you're doing from my standpoint. I think you're a minister now for New Thought Church. So I see all the stuff the little talks that you do on Instagram. And the coaching and things you do. And it's just so beautiful to see where your life has gone. And I've loved that connection.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You remember way more than I do. Well, I think, yes, every bit of that, you're like refreshing my memory. What I remember the most was that was such a special interaction. It was significant to me for so many reasons. Because I had come from such a dark place that listening to your music and singing, I was just coming into an empowered teaching, a spiritual teaching that is life affirming. That was like, you can do whatever you set your mind to. And it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't the teaching of my childhood. So seeing you and your singing partner as a representation of what was possible was like a mental equivalent for me. It was like so pivotal in my 16-year-old brain of like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I want to be traveling the world like them. I want to be doing that too. And then I got her ring and I wore that on my pinky because it fit me perfectly, like perfectly. And I have small hands. It fit my pinky I think I had that for 10 years. I never took it off. I started blossoming in the New Thought movement through youth leadership. And I started traveling the world. And when I started traveling the world, it went everywhere with me. And people would ask me, and I would always tell them the story of how I got it. And then one day, almost similar to what you just shared in your experience, I was on a train outside of Kiev in Ukraine. And it was an overnight train for 17 hours. We were traveling down to the Black Sea for a spiritual conference that I was part of. And I just remember we were exhausted. And if you've ever been in Eastern Europe, those trains are like old and rickety and just like awful. And you really want to shower. And so we get off the train the next morning and all we are thinking of is we need to jump into the Black Sea. Like we just need to cleanse all of this away. So we stripped down, jumped into the Black Sea, and that ring went with it.
Wow.
So the ring, and I was so heartbroken, but I was like, okay, I guess it's meant to be in the magic waters of the Black Sea off of Ukraine. So
wow,
there it went.
I love that, actually.
Yeah.
That's like the Titanic, man. Blue diamond, that big blue diamond worth millions.
Oh my gosh.
Aww.
And then that's when I reached out to you. And, it was just such a precious time. It was such a special interaction that I never forgot. And so when I did reach out to you, I was like, do you remember me? It's because if you had been, from my standpoint, I came from such a small town where nothing happened for anybody. I mean, there was nothing entertaining or exciting about where I grew up, so to have that kind of moment and then to see how my life has blossomed since, it's just like, wow, this was preordained. That's why I say that it wasn't just one moment where my life just opened spiritually. It was like moment after moment. And then you're just led,
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a crazy story that because this is 20 years ago. I mean, I guess we had contact, the ability to contact, but, something like that, something seemingly small, a ring, that could have been lost at any point over, a decade for whatever reason. And, the ability to reconnect after something like that at different times in your life, I mean, that's a precious story, man. That's very cool. I really like that. Because Corinne kind of told me that story to start it, but then to hear it from your perspective of, it was monumental for her to let go of and not be attached. And it was monumental for you to have something as a token of, moving forward. And I'd like you to explain or, maybe dive in more of what it felt like then, growing up in a small town, having this experience, becoming a part of you call it the New Thought Church. I'm not familiar with that. What is the background of that? And then how did you take that newfound experience into, traveling, and what was your life like for those, 10 years after you had that experience?
Oh man. Well, as I was saying, it was like divinely guided. And I think that, I look back now in reflection and think, if that unfortunate situation had not happened, my life would have outpictured in such a different way. So I'm actually quite grateful that it happened the way that it did, although it was traumatic and painful. And, over that 10-year span, I was just a sponge. I was like, give me everything and anything to make myself better. I want to learn. I want to grow. I became what's called a spiritual practitioner within our organization. So it's Centers for Spiritual Living is the organization that I work with. And it's basically the understanding that we're connected to a greater, higher power, and that we're co-creating the life we're living. And so I felt an immense freedom in this that I never felt in this teaching that I never felt as a child. I was always different as a kid. I was always intuitive, very self-aware, very sensitive. And I always had an interest in culture and language and how we all connect and why we all connect. And so over that span of 10 years, I was like a little world traveler where I'm like, I want to go everywhere. I want to know where there are other spiritual seekers like me. I want to teach this out in the world, and I want to know where they are. So I ended up in some of the, I don't know, not the most common places in the world. You know, I spent a significant amount of time, as I said, in Ukraine and Russia, and then I spent some time over in Egypt during the Arab Spring, which was a monumental experience, you know, obviously during a revolution. But none of that, I look back now and say, none of that was by accident. You know, everything led me there. It was like all the signs were there. And it was part of this evolution of my growing experience. It's like, okay, what do I need to learn now? Okay, here you go. It's like the universe gave this to me to say, figure this out now. Who are you now? So yeah, those 10 years were filled with college, travel, a lot of stumbling along the way. And then I landed into ministry.
Man, so what is the mechanism that you prescribe to okay, because you asked for a challenge, you said, what's the next phase? And then you followed that next bouncy ball. What is the mechanism of trust that you've developed? How do you know to just go? What is that intuition? How have you learned to trust that intuition during that process?
Well, I am a Sagittarius, so there's a lot to say about my sign, like through and through. You know that whole saying that feel the fear and do it anyway? There's always I've always had an edge of and plus when you're in your 20s, you're like, I can do anything, right? And I don't know if it was just that there was this urge. There was just that I was just following an inner guidance or my own GPS. I don't know exactly what it was. It was, and people have asked me over the years. They're like, "How did you have the courage to just take a leap? How did you just move your life to Egypt at the worst possible time?" And I say to them, "Well, we do a lot for love." Because that was love related. But it was also because I wanted to be in service. Like if you, as Dr. Michael Beckwith would say, is a great spiritual teacher, if you move in the direction of your vision, it's like our pain can push us only so far that our vision eventually pulls. So I was like, well, I've got a lot of pain in my life and I also have dreams. And that pain, was something that absolutely pushed me to the next step. And some of those were what you just said. I'm standing out on the cliff and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take a leap here. And that trust, perhaps it's a faith muscle. Maybe it was developed over time. I don't know. It's just, maybe it's something that's been inherent in me that was like, just take the step, like just go, because not everyone, as we know, has that. People tend to be very cautious and, right? Like, what's the word? Afraid.
Yeah. What's the word? Yeah.
The word. Yeah.
Yeah. I have people ask me all the time, because of course I've lived a life where, and I pretty frank about it. And blunt about it. I'm like, I've never really had a lot of savings. I, up until recently, have not really had health care. But I've always been able to make a lot of money, a lot of money in my world, which is not a lot in most people's world, but I've always been able to do whatever I wanted to do, travel where I wanted to go, buy whatever I wanted to buy. I've always paid cash for my cars. And I have had debt over the, long time ago that I learned from, but I don't have debt now. But I totally understand that is not for everybody. And most people, the majority of people wouldn't want to live like that. They want the savings. They want the health care. Like that's what works for them. And I understand that. But so are you sort of like me, where you're like, it's just, you're okay with the uncertainty of it?
Yes and no. I think that the older I'm getting, I am starting to go, okay, there's a little bit of adulting that needs to happen here, because I think that I did the spiritual fast track. if you look at the demographics in my organization, let's say people who are on the spiritual path who want to come into this, many of them come in so late in life. I'm the youngest ordained minister in our entire movement right now, which says something, because I'm in my late 30s. So, which tells me that there are people out in the world who are seeking. They just don't know that this exists. And so part of my mission for a really long time was, I just want to educate. Can I just get out there? And, being in your 20s, yes, I've always been kind of living in the unknown most of the time, in the uncertainty, until now I'm starting to think about, okay, I want some sustainability. I want to start my own business, which I've done, and I'm progressing and, adulting a little bit, doing the things that I didn't do 20 years ago, because I was out traveling the world and wanting to make a difference. And so I still want to do those things, but I want a little bit more security there.
Yeah, stability is a nice thing, and I'm sort of now doing that in my 50s. But I'm very proud of you for doing it in your 30s. Yeah, I mean, it's at the comfort level of whatever you're comfortable with. I was fine. I mean, I was traveling and teaching when I met you. I was in my 30s, but I continued to travel and teach until I was probably in my mid 40s and not really have a stable home. But I've been at my place now in Nashville for 9 years, which is the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life, even from when I was a kid. And it feels good. It feels nice to have a home, but also it feels great to travel. So I'm fine. I'm kind of fine. Whatever. It's like, I'm kind of go where the wind blows, really.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think that it's really awesome to have a home base and then to have my feelers out. I've always envisioned my life that way. I never could see my life as just this, what would you call it? The white picket fence, American dream scenario. It's always just been, I want to live a life of service. I want to make a difference in the world. I, of course, want love and partnership and all those amazing things. And I want success. And it just has always felt bigger than me, if that makes sense.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, yeah. And if you develop that intuition and you have that relationship with your own life, and I like that you say co-creation, because that is what it feels like, right? I mean, we're here to do something. We're here to be in life. We're here to experience the reality. So we're the doer, we're the hands of whatever that, massive gravity of, call it God or whatever you want. We're here to do that service. And we talk a lot about flow state, and when you're in that, it sounds like you call it service, different verbiage, but, it's that flow state of, okay, what's the next challenge? It says go, you do. Your life tends to be created for you, through you in a lot of ways. And I like the way that you put, those couple, you have a vision, you have a dream, you have these things for yourself, but the space in between receiving that is on somebody else's terms or something else's term, and it will bring you through that if you're meant to be through that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. We all use different semantics, but I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think you're calling the bouncing ball and we're calling turning points. And then you had alluded to, a lot of times that had come from pain. And that certainly has been the case in my life. Like, I certainly got into meditation through a physical pain, like through an ulcer. Like, I had a, 3-year-long ulcer. I started meditating, the ulcer went away, but then it became this huge spiritual journey. But it was really, for me, a lot of it was the pain. One of my biggest pains was loneliness. And so that's something that brought me inward. And so, of course, through loneliness, I would always search, my man picker was broken for many years, and I would always search to fill the hole in relation. Oh, I could tell you some stories, but I'll save it for the book. Sean knows some of them. But it's that pain, that saying that the heart cracks open with the pain, right? And so, do you have any of those that you feel like it would be drawn to share at all?
Yeah, I mean, so many. I think the biggest one, I think, that was so transformational in both my personal and spiritual life was the relationship I had with someone in Egypt. I mean, that's what got me there. And these are soul connections that sometimes we just can't explain. And it was one of those things where I didn't want a long distance relationship. I really wanted the closeness and intimacy with a partner and a partnership where we could do similar work out in the world. So having a similar vision. And so I took the leap and moved to Egypt during, the height of the revolution there. And through that experience, I was in Egypt for about 9 months. That's as long as I could really do it. I learned so much about myself. I recognized that all of the distractions that I had used in this country to protect myself, to not have to look at my feelings of inadequacy or my feelings of not enoughness, all of my childhood rage that had gone for years unexpressed, totally came out there because you have no distractions. It's like the what is the word? The senses. I mean, everything is up. And you know this, Corinne, from living in India. Like, it's like everywhere I went was just noise and constant barraging of my mental space, my field. And he didn't know how to deal with it. He didn't know what to do with it. He's from that culture, so he could empathize with me greatly. But ultimately, I had to really work through it myself and to ask myself, well, who are you, Savanna, without all of these identifications of spiritual teacher, reverend, whatever, fill in the blank. And it was kind of a rude awakening, but it was also, as we know, through the pain came so much, awareness and light. I ended up coming back to the States. And of course, that relationship in the end didn't work out, but it left this residue with me for years after that. What was really brilliant about, in a good way, and what was brilliant about that experience is that I was contacted by a publisher at Science Mind magazine who I was in class with years ago. And he said, I was curious, you had this really dark experience in Egypt. Would you be willing to write about it? Could you write about how do we find the sacred or the divine or whatever you call a higher power? How do we find that in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of the shadow? And he said, would you write an article about it? Would you write something? I said, sure. So I did. And I shared my experience of living over in Egypt. And then literally a few months later, he comes to me and says, we love this so much that we would like to publish it for Science Mind magazine, but we also want to put you on the cover. And that experience, like, all of a sudden my face is all over the place in Barnes and Noble and everywhere. But what that did is it launched a whole path for me when I came back home. It was such a horrible experience, there. But then when I got home, I ended up doing like a 25 city speaking tour with this concept, which allowed me to speak about and heal from the shadow. Like, what is the shadow and how do we find light in the midst of the darkness? And it totally jump-started what I would call my career now. So, I mean, a beautiful gift came out of such a dark time in relationship through pain.
Well, it usually does. I mean, that's, Corinne and I, we've shared plenty of, stories within our own lives of similar situations like that. And it's interesting when you get put on a path to go almost find those experiences of pain, right? And nothing's more painful than that internal walk, that, going into the wilderness of your own mind, into your own being, and discovering all the self-loathing, the feelings of inadequacy, like you mentioned, all of those things. Those are the, I don't know, the sharpest points, to the pain that causes us. And it's our own self-doing, and we perpetuate that in a lot of ways with unhealthy patterns. And it's funny that, I don't know if this has been your experience, but it seems like that force that puts us on the path to go usually guides us to or through some sort of painful experience that resonates with something inside of us that is unworked or not worked out or unchecked or, whatever. And it's almost like I almost expected you to say something really awesome at the end of that story because, something that painful and, the cacophony of being in a space that is totally uncomfortable for you, if you can survive that, usually breeds something fantastic. So thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah. That's so cool. I'm really glad that you said that because I don't know if that's human conditioning or in our DNA where we want to hear the whole story through and through, and we want the beginning, the middle, and the end, and we want something juicy and awesome to happen from that, right? Yeah.
It's the hero's journey.
That's right.
We're sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Corinne, but that's the hero's journey, and you can either live your life living vicariously through the historical records of heroes, or you can create your own story and you can go on your own path and conquer those internal demons. And it's not something that's ultimately desirable in the beginning. Like you almost know you're going to go through some shit, but at the end of it, I mean, the juice is worth the squeeze for absolutely sure. That's true.
That was awesome. The juice, you can use that in one of your talks, Savanna. That's great. The juice is worth the squeeze.
Oh, I think that's a saying. I stole it from somebody.
I have never heard that before. Have you, Savanna?
I think so, but the way you said it, It was just perfectly timed. So
I know I can't take credit for it, so feel free to call me out. That's definitely somebody else's. But
that's a book title.
Yes. That is a book title. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we either become the victim or the hero, but even the people that are the victim are still the hero of their own journey, just until if and when they decide to become the hero rather than the victim. And we love stories. I mean, that's why we love doing the podcast. I mean, we come from thousands of years of storytellers. And the Bible is, and then many spiritual teachings, we learn from these parables. I find I love sharing stories, like stories that I've heard from the many teachers I've studied with when I'm working with my coaching clients or in my yoga or workshops or trainings or whatever. Sean knows I'm constantly, telling little parables and stories that we can, put ourselves in. I was actually just told one the other day. Maybe we can all share one. I was walking along the beach with somebody who was visiting here, and I had said to her, her mother wanted me to tell her, she's like 25 years old and she's sort of in the middle of some changes, and her mother wanted me to share with her what I'd shared with her about the GPS. And it's funny, Savanna mentioned that's why it was on my mind, our inner GPS. And I remember years ago, Deepak Chopra was at a retreat with him, and he's like, there's this GPS that is coming out soon. This is back in 1999, and he said, I've just seen this thing that's going to come out soon, and you'll be able to put your address in, and it'll bring you to where you want to go. But it can reroute you. If there's a car accident, or if you've stopped, or if you've taken a wrong turn, it has a bigger perspective, so it can reroute you. And so I use that with all my students. I'm like, you have an inner GPS. All you have to do is figure out where you want to go. And that might change. Like even, in the GPS, even if you change addresses, it's all good. But the universe works out the details. So I had reiterated this to this 25-year-old girl, and she's like, well, and she had all these questions about trusting, and what about people that are suffering in the world, and all the suffering that's going on, and all these questions. This basically her question is about discomfort, like this pain and suffering. And I'm like, our pain is, as we know, pain is part of our living, our existence, because we are physical beings. But we learn more from pain than we do pleasure, and it's how we respond. It's all about experience. My language now is not good or bad. It's just an experience. We all have experiences. And when you look at these, we all learn from our pain. We all learn when the crack, or we don't, but that's another story of people that they will get it until they don't. And that's just part of the human process, is physical and emotional pain. Not everything is going to be rosy. We have to have that contrast.
Yeah. I was just talking about this yesterday, about how contrast has been the greatest teacher for me personally. When I was coming here to Seattle, I spent 6 years living in Oakland, and I realized that experience in Oakland was really rough. I mean, it was a hard 6 years, and I was very unhappy, and I kept waiting for the light at the end of the tunnel to show up. And when it finally did, and I got to the other side, I was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness for contrast, because I appreciate it so much more. And I see that there's so much more out there than that suffering place that I was in. But as my mom has always said to me, Savanna, nothing is ever wasted. Like, no part, even the parts where I was like, gosh, if I had only known this sooner, or why did it take me 6 years to get to this place? But it took what it took, and I got what I needed to learn, and nothing is wasted, because I know I'm using it all now.
Yeah, man. And that's the spiritual maturity is, oh, this sucks. Good. Oh, this is amazing. Good. You reach that point, and obviously that's an oversimplification, because when you're in the moment, it's it's rarely ever that easy. And there's plenty of experiences. The most recent that I've had was I built a house with my 90-year-old grandfather, because he's old, lonely, and just wanted a project. And it was quite possibly the most difficult, year of my life. He drove me absolutely crazy because of the unreasonable nature of any, no offense to 9-year-olds out there, but there's it goes, the mental capacities go. And, it drove me crazy. And there was so many things that I wanted out of it. Like, why doesn't he just understand? And why can't he do this? And why can't he just change how he views this and this? And it's like, maybe I need to let go of needing other people to change. Maybe I need to let go of the mechanism inside of me that judges where somebody's at and what they're doing. And yes, obviously I know that if they did this better, it would be better for them, but maybe they need to do that. Maybe they need to go through that experience. And, it really teaches that whole contrast of, yes, it sucks. Yes, it's hard. But if you go through it, you'll learn something if you're paying attention. Why would you want to take that away from somebody? Why would we want to take that contrast from each other? And I think our society, to a certain degree, is designed. There's a safety mechanism of numbing from that. We don't want to feel that negativity. We don't want to feel that depression. We don't want to feel all that darkness. And we don't even want to talk about that darkness. We don't want to talk about the pain, because it's hard to talk about the pain. But if you don't express it, if you don't go through it, if you don't put that in the fire, it will always follow you around. And so, yeah, contrast is incredibly important, because pain is a great teacher.
Yeah, I like what has helped me over the years is with the contrast thing. There's a couple of things, but when you hold a candle up to the sunlight, the candle disappears. Like we need to have we can't be all light, and we wouldn't want it. Like I tell my students all the time, if people that want the astrology done and they want to know their future, they want to know how this is going to work, I'm like, you don't want to know how it's going to, you don't want to read a book that you don't start at the back of the book, and if you reread a book, it's after many years, we need this hero's journey. That's what we love. And why we try to avoid that. Like Colleen, my roommate, she's a surgeon, and she's like, we have to change our relationship to pain. We have this like really big aversion as human beings, and it's natural, of course, physically, touch the fire. Of course, we have to, physically avoid that pain, but we've taken it way too far, and we're way too comfortable. And I'm sure, Savanna, that was part of your experience, certainly is mine in India. It's like, I got comfortable. My discomfort muscle is very strong and very good. Like because India can be really uncomfortable in every single way. Even after 21 years of going there, it's uncomfortable physically. It's never, every time you have a great hotel or a great meal, you're pretty much guaranteed when you go back there, it'll never be good again. Like nothing is consistent in India. And so I feel like that's part of our suffering, is the seeking of comfort. On our daily, it doesn't mean that we don't enjoy pleasure. It just means that to be comfortable with discomfort.
Yes.
Because the contrast is part of our experience, and we don't necessarily appreciate things. How many people have said they don't appreciate something until it's gone? Yeah. I don't want to live my life like that. I want to appreciate, like when I walk down the stairs, my mind, kind of like the angel of death is walking on your shoulders, like that's a spiritual practice. Almost every time now, maybe because I'm a little older now, but when I walk down the stairs, I'm like, I could easily fall and break I'm so grateful that I can walk right now and just have my healthy body. And that helps me to be aware and present in every moment.
Something else, just one other component of this that I think is really interesting is that when you were talking about how your discomfort muscle is really strong. And I so relate to that. The number of times that I've been in another country where I had absolutely zero control over whatever it was that was going on. And it required a certain patience and just a willingness to, as you said, sit in the discomfort, to the point where I think I've gotten to a place, and I don't think this is apathy. I think it's more of seeing the universe as humorous. Like, okay, this is really hysterical. Can we just laugh about this? Because how many times has this happened now? Can I just laugh? So recently I was given a really difficult diagnosis, and it's not life-threatening, although it could be, but it's not, and I'm fine. But when I first initially got the diagnosis, of course I went into a panic and was just like, I heard nothing that the doctor said and was like, am I going to die? Like, can you just tell me, is this terminal or not? And then once I had a moment, I literally got off the phone with her and I started laughing. I started laughing because I was like, okay, universe, like really, like this is going to be a really great sermon later, but really, like, it's crazy that my mind went right to that. Like, great sermon. This is going to be really good later. But right now it just sucks that I have to go through this. But I think that the more I don't know if accustoms is even the right term for it, but it's just learning to navigate that discomfort. And when it comes up, you're present with it. And you're like, okay, here you are again, fear. Here you are again, whatever it is. And then being able to laugh at ourselves. This human life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the funny thing is, when you break it down like that, because what's the worst that's going to happen? You're either going to suffer, which we already are, or you're going to die, which we most certainly will. So it actually is the funniest part about all this is that we take anything too serious, right? I mean, the fact that we're caught up in, I don't want to suffer. I'm going to go suffer worrying about not suffering. It's like it's bound to happen. And I think that's, one of our earlier podcasts we had was with Roger, Corinne's meditation teacher. And everything he said was just, it had that grain of salt kind of vibe to it. And at the very end, he's just like, don't take any of this too seriously. Don't take any of it too seriously, whether it's your practice, whether it's life, whether it's a suffering, whether it's a pain, whether it's the learning and knowing, be light, be light with it, because you're either going to learn to enjoy it or it's going to plague you. It's going to plague you no matter what. So I love that. I love that element of it. It's like, yes, just laugh through it because it will be a beautiful sermon later. That's funny.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I freaking love that. I mean, and that's to me, that's a really close stage. So the way I describe what Deepak talked about years ago is the manifestation process. And I don't know if you've ever heard him talk about this, Savanna, but he's one of my first teachers, so I have a lot of stories about him. But so he said the first stage of manifestation is you think about an apple and then a truck drives by with a picture of an apple on it. And then the second stage of manifestation, you think about the apple, and a friend calls and says, do you need anything at the store? And you say, apple, but I need some apples. The third stage of manifestation is you think about the apple and your friend just shows up with apples for you when they come over to visit. And then the fourth stage of manifestation is you think about the apple and the apple appears in your hand. And so to me, when you talk about you were with the doctor, your mind was going everywhere. But then as soon as you got off the phone, you laughed because you had that awareness, because I think that what happens is in that first stage of when somebody is not an aware human being, they're with the doctor, not thinking anything, and then they cry for days about it, right? And that's that, think about the apple and the truck drives, right? That's the first stage. And then the second stage is you get the news, you have a good cry for, a half a day, and then you get a grip on it. And then the third stage is you get the news and it's like your mind goes everywhere, but then as soon as you hang up the phone, you think it's a good sermon. And then the fourth stage is awareness. You get the news and you're fully present with the doctor. You're not in the fear. You're just fully present, hear everything. And then you get off the phone and you're just present with everything that is.
Yep. That's exactly that. That is a beautiful way of explaining it. It was once I went through all of those stages, I was able to call her and say, okay, what do we need to do? Like what now? And it's also all of those experiences in my life that have been painful or difficult I feel like they've shaped me. I mean, they help me be a better human. I'm a better counselor, because I have so much more compassion and empathy for the people I work with. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, I know. I so know. I have been there. I often see myself in my clients. I don't know if you have that experience too, but it's that mirroring thing of like, gosh, I so can be vulnerable with you right now. And I so can feel I'm connected because I went through it. As opposed to someone just giving advice unsolicited that has never been through the shadows and through hell. I think as you said, it takes great spiritual maturity, to have the empathy to stand in someone else's shoes and at the same time reflect back to them what's possible and what I see. And that diagnosis was it wasn't really a test, but kind of in that I laughed about it later, even though there is a seriousness to it. For me, there was. I can be proactive and I can also know the truth of myself, of who I am and my beliefs. And so that for me comes back to, well, what is my source and supply and what do I truly know about myself? Like, what am I really connected to here, regardless of the condition that I'm seeing that's out picturing. And so when I take medication, I'm constantly saying the affirmation. I'm constantly knowing that my body knows what to do. And, it's, for me, that's spiritual practice right there.
Yeah, and it's empowerment. I mean, you're taking ownership of it, and you're empowering yourself through that practice, and saying, "This is what's happening right now, but this is not defining me. What defines me is the vastness that I draw life from. That well, we were just talking about this on the last podcast. That well that you go back to, that spiritual well." Where you drink from and it fills you back up. And this is just another experience, not something that, will completely, make you into a concrete identity. And that's amazing, man. I mean, that's righteous. That's a very righteous thing to do, man. Righteous.
I haven't heard that word in so long.
He loves that word. He loves that word.
I love it.
That's great. Okay, so I hope you do share your story more. I'm sure you will. I want to hear that sermon about your health journey because it is probably one of the most challenging things, I think, no matter how spiritual you are, and I don't like using that word, but how aware you are and how awake you are, there's still life situations we have to deal with. And yet, as Sean so beautifully said, not getting lost in it and overshadowed by it. So you deal with what you need to deal with, but then, you have whatever's working for you, your prayers and your positive, affirmations of what the medicine you're taking. So I do hope you share that with more people and in more detail at some point when you're ready, because it is a challenge for people to stand strong when they're dealing with a medical issue, for sure.
For sure, that condition. Like, I think that I'll probably share it once I'm on the other side of it.
Yeah,
You know, you have a different perspective, altogether.
Well, it's so great to speak with you and to see your beautiful face and to hear what you've done in your life and to share our story. So thank you.
Yeah, I love how this has all come around. I mean, it's been a long time, Corinne, and it's so cool. So I'm really grateful I got to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's fun how we make connections, deep connections that we don't even know are that deep until much later in life. And so what a cool story. Do stay in touch as you get through, everything in your life, every new experience, stay in contact because we'd love to talk to you again, man.
Awesome.
Hello, welcome to the Say More section with Savanna Riker. She is an incredibly sweet person who has an amazing amount of experiences, and we got to discover you and her connection from years ago, which was really interesting. And I loved kind of the motif of we meet people in our lives, and sometimes it's seemingly, not dramatic, right? It's or maybe it was dramatic for you, but there's no reason it would have been dramatic for them. And if you go back through that story, the funny thing, it was very profound for each one of you, and it was a turning point for each one of you. Maybe a little bit more so for her, but it was part of your mindfulness practice of letting go. But then it was a profound, kind of an anchor for her to start on a new path, and we have no idea sometimes that's going to happen or how that's going to unfold. And it's really cool to see how that played out for her and what you guys both remember. So that was really cool.
I mean, it was fun to be able to recount that without having talked about it beforehand. The only thing we did was I told you the story a couple of weeks ago that I'd booked Savanna and this is how we met. But that, other than that, we had not, connected. And so that was really fun to kind of do it real time with her. And, it's just so fun. I feel like we have church every week. I mean, defining church as connecting with people and going deeper and, learning things and expanding open and, and I just love, Savannah's, we discussed, she's 37 now. I met her when she was 16 and she shared, some of the painful journeys. Like I like following her on Instagram because she does little talks, like she'll be driving in the car and she'll be like, I know you might be feeling like this today, but this is what I do. And she just is, like you had said, before we recorded and before you said you were totally in love with her. And in a human being way, he's like, I'm so in love with her. And I'm like, well, hold on, say that. And he's like, I can't say that. Well, I can say it. And you mean in a human way, like in a connection, like you see her spirit and soul and calmness way. And I don't know how I got off on that. I don't know what I was saying, but
no. I mean, and yes, it's the courage, the bravery, and to go through pain, and just the way. In a lot of ways, I don't want to say envy, but I guess I'm proud of her courage because I'm not always that courageous, and I know a lot of other people aren't that courageous, and it's very difficult to go through painful experiences. It's another thing to seek out or at least be willing to be guided into new painful experiences, and I think that's. The fascination that I had was like, fuck, you're not, the way you're saying this is there's no consideration in your mind to do otherwise. She's anchored in that intuition and she's anchored in that guidance. And I don't even know if it's really a trust thing at this point for her. It's just, this is what I do. This is what I've committed my life to. And I like that we use different verbiage for things. That's, when you talk about your church every week, we have very different ways of looking at things. And I know we have different words that we use for the same experiences. And that's what I think is so profound, is meeting people. For you had met her and you had small communication with her. I've never met her before in my life, but there are so many things that resonate, and there's so many things that she reflects that reflect in me that I would reflect back, because having gone through a lot of those same experiences, and growing to love people for those I don't know, that spiritual bravery, or that ability to trust, or at least that ability to move through because you have a relationship with the Almighty, that whatever you call that. It's very inspiring, and it's moving to see that.
Yeah, and the thing is that I think to take pause and to note and to give credit to is that we are used to, you and I specifically, and most of the people we talk to, I think, well, probably everybody we talk to, I could say, they see the gifts in the pain, right? They see the gifts in the painful stories. And that's what Savanna saw when she came back and wrote, and when they asked to write about the pain. Obviously, she shared it with a few people if they knew she'd gone through a painful experience in Egypt, and then brave enough to write about it, and then do like a 30-city lecture on it and share it, never face on the cover through this painful experience, but to see it as a growth and expansion. That's it. That's where the gift lies. And that's where I see some of my coaching clients have a hard, and I think people in general have a hard time. If they're struggling, it's because they don't see the gifts in the pain. They don't see that our pain, and whether it's people or situations, are our greatest teacher. Once you embrace that your most painful or any painful situation has the ability to teach you something and to help you expand, I feel like that's my superpower. My perspective is that I draw everything to myself, and whether that's true or not, it's just the story I tell myself, to me, so that I can learn. Nothing happens to me. It all happens for me, and I take responsibility for all of it. So I'm never a victim. That gives me full power. It doesn't matter if it's the worst thing that I've had happen to me. I take full responsibility for it. And I feel like Savanna does that too. And it's a gift and of course you do also.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned to, for sure, because it's not often obvious when you're making yourself out to be the victim. It's hard to have that vantage point over our own life. Likewise, it can be difficult to know when you're doing something heroic too, because it's just what's in front of you, and you don't often know that until you've gone through that experience. So yeah, I mean, for sure, if you're going to stand in, I'm the victim of this whatever circumstance, this pain is coming from somewhere else, and it's causing me to do this. I'm the victim. I identify as the victim. You're only creating a bigger hurdle to overcome, because you're not focused or aware of the potential to not be the victim in the future. You're just cementing yourself in that identity, and that's whether that's any identity, really. I mean, you can say, well, the pain is just a part of me. I always have something wrong, and there's always something that is plaguing me, and blah 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 blah. And listen, people have some hard shit in their lives, and this year has been it's put a microscope on that pain in a lot of people's lives, and it's exposed them even deeper to their weakness. So this is not somebody on a high horse saying, get over yourself. It's not that bad. It probably is that bad. It probably is that painful, and it probably is that difficult to get through. If so, own that, and know that the fact that you're even enduring it in the first place is a superpower, and then build from that, and know that you have the potential to move through it, and trust that if you don't identify with the victimhood, if you don't identify with the pain, with the circumstance, but just as you described it, as this is something that's happening through my life for me to learn from, I know you will find a lesson in it. I know you will, because that is where the lesson comes from, is reaching that higher perspective. And then you will empower yourself to pull yourself out of that circumstance and change it. And I mean, she's a mirror for that experience, and a mirror for that power and the ability to learn and grow and change and understand that the contrast in life. And that was incredibly inspiring to see her be that forthcoming and exposed in a lot of that.
That's beautiful, Sean. Such a great reminder, and to, because it's easy when you're talking about this stuff, but when somebody's listening to us and they're in the middle of their shit, it might be, I'm glad you said that, because it might sound like, we've never been there or something. And as Savanna so eloquently put, it's like, we have been there. That's why we can say that you will get through the other side, and it will get better. And maybe the time when you're in the middle of it, maybe it's not the time to see things on the bright side, right? We have to allow ourselves to experience the pain. And then once we're on the other side of it, then heal from that, and then see a different perspective, see the gifts. I mean, it's all time. It's all time, and it's kindness and sweetness to yourself. I was so, I still remember that interview with Brian, when he and Marty, both of them were like all about the love. Be kind, be sweet to yourself. And I just love that. And I spent the whole yoga class last Saturday teaching to my students. I'm like, just be sweet in your attitude to your body, to yourself right now. And they appreciated that. So so if you're listening right now and you're in the middle of something intense, emotionally, physically, with your body or with another person or a relationship or whatever it is, be with that. Be with, the pain as best you can, and share it with people that you're close to and love, because it always helps to share your pain with people, to tell your story. That's studies they've done with cancer patients and people who've experienced trauma in, hurricanes and tsunamis and things. If you share your pain, it does help to process it. But then there's that point in time where it's time to let go and get to the next level. And I think that's what we're talking about, is when people get stuck in the story of the pain. So it gets comfortable. They're comfortable in, as far weird as that sounds, they're comfortable in the pain of that story, because that maybe is holding on to the person they want to hold on to. That story, being in the pain will hold on to that. But you want to be able to move through, so that you have some, and that's how we move through life, because there's always going to be something more painful down the road. We're always going to have to go through something, because that's just part of life. And there's also going to be joy. And so to be in it, to process it, as you put in the lecture or in the episode with Savanna as well, you're like, you got to be in it. You got to feel it. Don't try to push it away or Pollyanna it. Feel it when you're in it. But then afterwards, there's a time to let go. And
that actually this whole conversation or this part of the conversation reminds me of I mentioned that Jack Kornfield and Tim Ferriss podcast that I listened to, and at one point, Tim asked Jack, how do you mentor, or because he does a lot of seminars with kids, gang-related youth, and then also veterans of war. And Tim's like, how do you even open up that conversation? With how do you get people to be disarmed in that situation, so they're ready to receive, the meditation practice? Because I can imagine there's so much darkness, and Jack kind of went into, it's like, you have to be available to hear that person's darkness. You have to be available to honor the pain, or honor the dark experiences that they have, or the hatred. A lot of the in the gang-related youth seminars that he does, he talks about they're just aggressive, painful, traumatic, driven, youth that are looking to express that in life. And, with veterans, it's they, he said one of the more common things he hears is the veterans say, I can't talk about what I saw or what I experienced because people don't want to hear what it is that I experienced. And then they say, what's worse than that is I can't talk about what I had to do because people certainly don't want to hear what it is that I had to do. And so what Jack does is he creates a group, and it's a free space, a non-judgmental space for these veterans to share in those experiences and tell your story. Like, listen, no judgments here. You were fighting for our freedoms. You were fighting a war that was started or dictated by somebody else. What did you go through, and what did you have to do? And what he found was that so many of these veterans had very similar experiences. They had very similar painful, traumatic things that happened to them. And as you can imagine, they had to do some of the darkest things that we can imagine doing to each other. And once they can feel that from each other, once they can experience that pain together and they can say it out loud, that is that moment where they can let go then, and they can start to heal from that trauma, because there's an affirmation from the organization. And this is a great tool to have if you are looking for a mindfulness practice. Find a congregation where you can talk about the hard shit you're going through, the things that don't make sense, the things that are grinding against your programming. There are people, and we just had a conversation with somebody who can relate to so many of the same experiences that we've had, even though it's been through different eyes and through different perspective. That's when you can start to heal from that, and finding people that help you empower yourself to go through those experiences.
Yeah.
And then start meditating.
Yeah, or start meditating before. But sometimes people can't, that or have had a lot of trauma like that. They can't sit with themselves because they've got all this stuff. And then when they go to a meeting like that, then they're able to let it go, and it just becomes less sticky. Because that's it. When we have these Velcro, that's what trauma and PTSD is. It's like this Velcro thought that is sticking to us that seems real. And we know the brain doesn't know the difference between a memory and the actual event. So that's why PTSD, because the trauma, when they think about it, the same stress chemicals are released in the body. And so that's why it's so important to move through whatever it is you're moving through, get on the other side, process it properly, and then get on the other side, and then be ready for the next thing in life, because there will always be the next thing. This too shall pass, but there'll be something else around the corner, or open another door. And,
that will be needed to pass through too as well, however you say that. So yeah, for sure, man. So but yeah,
go ahead.
No, what a beautiful conversation. And, I wish her well. And it sounds like, we'll be talking to her, future down the road. And I can't wait, to hear more.
Certainly be hearing about her for sure, and probably talking to her too. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Well, thank you so much again. I appreciate it. And till next time, enjoy your week.
Next time.